Hello from Tampa, Florida. I've been looking forward to spending time with you this way. Hopefully, later this year, in September, we'll be able to be there physically in person. We look forward with a lot of excitement for that. I'm going to spend some time to you talking about a series of stories called parables that Jesus gives in Luke 15. The title of my talk is Finding What is Lost. I'm sure if you're like me, you've lost lots of things. I've gotten to the age where if I can't find something, I just quit looking for it because I know eventually I'll find it or I won't. I know my father-in-law had a dog named Boo, and it was lost for a year. Boo was. She wandered off, and somebody about 100 kilometers away recognized her and brought her back to my father-in-law, and there was great rejoicing when Boo came back. Well, in Luke 15, Jesus tells three parables about finding something that's lost. Now, I know you've looked at one of these about the lost sheep. But first, let me just say a few words about parables. I know you've been looking at a bunch of parables. And we often think of parables as a delivery system for an idea or a point. We want to know, what's the point of it? It's like, what's the moral of the story? What's the moral of it? What's the point somebody telling the story is trying to make? And sort of like we think of a parable as the skin of an orange. It just sort of is what packages the good stuff inside that feeds you. But that's really not how Middle Easterners saw parables. For them, a story presented a world that was a challenge to your own world. And the story was offered an opportunity to enter into a world and figure out how that world might be better or different from your world and what it might say to you about your own world. And so in a way, we are to find ourselves in the stories we hear. So we find our own stories in these parables. And so there's not always a point that says this is the main point somebody's trying to make. In this case, Jesus is trying to make. But it's more an experience that helps us understand who we are and what the world is like. And in this case, what God is like. And it's told in story term because not every truth is best reduced to just a proposition. So here's the context for these stories. I'm reading from Luke 15, just the first 3 verses. This tells the context. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to hear him. And the Pharisees and the scribes grumbled, saying, "This man receives sinners and eats with them." So he, Jesus, told them this parable. Notice it says this parable, but there are really 3 parables that follow. Well, first of all, what do we learn here? Well, one of the sets of characters were the Pharisees. And it's obvious they saw the world in terms of good people and bad people, or the sinners, and they knew themselves to be the good people. They spent their life avoiding any connection with the bad people, because associating with bad people was dishonoring. This is a culture in which honor is the primary value. And honor is that everybody sees you and understands you are living well and doing the right thing. And there's always a competition for honor in an honor-driven society. It's honor versus shame, and you want to avoid shame. Well, the sinners were the people who lived with shame because they did not follow the Jewish law strictly enough. They were in some way second-class citizens. But it's interesting, the tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to Jesus to hear him. So Jesus was attracting these people. These are the people who lived with a sense of shame in their own culture because they didn't have the honor that the leading elite of the culture had. And this would be the Pharisees and the scribes. And so they are offended that Jesus would associate with the sinners, because to associate with the sinners, his goodness doesn't rub off on them. Their pollution corrupts him. That's their view. To be with a sinner would be to become unclean in their culture, and you would lose honor. And so they see Jesus eating with the sinners. They wouldn't eat with somebody who was not a follower of the Jewish law to the same degree they were, because there was a routine. You had to do certain things before you were clean enough to eat. And so they were offended. They wanted to protect their honor. And Jesus tells these stories in response to their criticism. But they're really one story with several scenes or acts. And we know the first story is about the shepherd who goes to find one lost sheep. We refer to him as the good shepherd. And one sheep out of 100 is lost. The second parable is about a woman who loses and finds some coins. We refer to her as the good woman. We don't know how many coins she lost, but she lost some. And the thing that's interesting, archaeologists have identified the typical dwelling in that area where this parable was set, and they built with really dark stone, almost black stone, and they had very, very small windows that were up high. So it was easy to lose things in a black, dark room with no light other than whatever candles you had. So she was very happy. She has to work hard to find them. And then the third story we know as the story of the prodigal son. It's one son out of two who is lost. But it's really the story of the good father. So I'm going to make a comment on all these parables together, and then we're going to focus more on the story of the prodigal son. Now, first of all, who are the characters in these stories? This is important. Jesus tells a story about a shepherd, and then about a woman, and then about a prodigal son. The whole issue that he was dealing with the Pharisees was their sense that the world can be divided into people who have honor and those who have shame, those who are good, those who are bad. They worked very hard to make sure everybody knew they were the good folks. They were not the people who lived with shame. They lived with honor. So Jesus tells three stories. The story about the shepherds. Shepherds were people who had very little honor. They were country folk. They were smelly. They lived outside. They had low honor. Everybody needed their work, but they had low honor. And so he tells a story about somebody with low honor. The second story about the woman. She has low honor. The Jewish men prayed, "Thank you, God, that I was not made a woman." Men had honor, women did not have honor. So he tells another story about somebody who has no honor, or very little honor. The only honor a woman would have would be the honor she would get from her husband, or if she's unmarried, her father. And then in the prodigal son, we see a Jewish son mistreat his father in shameful ways. And we'll see how the father brings shame on himself in his response to his son. And Jesus is telling us something about God in each story and about himself in each story. He is the finder in each story. He's the good shepherd, the good woman, the good father. And so we're going to look at these. And what we see is in each of these, what was lost is found. The sheep is found. But there's a cost to finding that sheep. You have to go wandering in the desert. And sheep are heavy. And to have to carry the sheep took some effort. And what happens after the sheep is found? There's great rejoicing. And in fact, we find that in every story. There's great rejoicing when the woman finds her coins. There's great rejoicing when the prodigal son comes back. And the point that what Jesus says in each one is something like, there's great rejoicing when somebody who has lived in shame, who is a sinner, has a new relationship with God. God rejoices when sinners come to God. When they come and have a relationship with God, and God is able to raise them up in honor. So there's a lot of celebration, put on a party, food and drinks for their friends to celebrate. Sounds very Czech. Now, let's look at the story of the prodigal son in more detail. This is a story in 2 acts. The first act deals with the younger brother, and the second act deals with the older brother. Now, I'm going to read through this parable and just make some comments about what's happening in the story, and then I'll make some conclusions here. So, Jesus says, there's a man who had 2 sons. And the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of my property that is coming to me. And he, the father, divided his property between them, meaning between the older son and the younger son. In the Jewish law, the older son would get the largest part of the inheritance, and the younger son would get half what the older son gets. So the older son is living in the honored position, and the younger son resents it. We don't know why, but he wants his inheritance. Now, the inheritance is mainly land. That's the resource, land and sheep and goats. That's the resource that people had. It's not businesses. It's not lots of money. It's land. But when he tells his father, I want my inheritance, he's basically telling his father, I want you dead, because that's the only condition under which he gets an inheritance. You have to die for somebody to get to inherit what you have. But so the father agrees. And so the younger son is greatly dishonoring his father. He's bringing shame on him in the community, because in the Jewish world, children were to honor their fathers and their mothers. They were to obey their parents. They were to honor them by obeying. And to ask and say, Dad, I want my inheritance now while you're still alive. I really would prefer you would die. He is making a public rejection of his father. And that would dishonor the father, because it meant the father has not done a good job raising this child. And so we don't know how the older son responds at this place, but the father divides the property between them. And then in verse 13, it continues, not many days later, the young son gathered all he had and took a journey into a far country, and there he squandered his property in reckless living. Okay, I said that the primary inheritance was land. So this meant when he gathered all he had, the young son had to sell his land. And so this is again dishonoring, because a family's wealth that could be passed on was in its land. He sold his portion of the land to somebody else who was not part of the family. And he then leaves. So those of you who've grown up in small villages in the Czech Republic, you know what it's like. If somebody does something, everybody else learns about it and talks about it. I guarantee you in this village, everybody was talking about what this young son had done. And then he squandered his property in reckless living. Now, we get the phrase, the prodigal son, from that phrase, squandered his property, because prodigal means wasting. He wasted his property in reckless living. He was prodigal with it. He wasted it. He treated it as if there was no end to it. So he just used it up, but he used it quickly. And so here we have him wasting his money in some foreign country. Verse 14. And when he had spent everything, we don't know how long that took, probably didn't take very long, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. Well, if you spend all your money, And then a famine comes, you don't have any money to buy food. He went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into his field to feed pigs. And he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, and no one gave him anything. Several things to note here. He went to a country where people raised pigs. Jewish people were not allowed to eat pigs, touch pigs, be near pigs. It was whoever hired him insulted him by saying, okay, Jewish person, Jewish man, you go feed the pigs. And the fact that he lost his inheritance to Gentiles was another way he dishonored his father. And he dishonored his whole village. His whole village would be opposed to him. If he ever came back, they would reject him. They would kick him out, if not kill him, because he had lost his inheritance to a Gentile, eating pigs. And the pigs are eating pods. These are from the carob trees. They are things that people ate who were very poor. And he's just thinking, I have nothing. You know, I had all this money, but now it's gone. I'm feeding pigs, and I want to eat the same things the pigs are eating. And he's hitting rock bottom. Verse 17, continue. But when he came to himself, we don't know exactly what that means, other than it's an idiom meaning he just realized something's not right here. This is not how I want to live. He said, how many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread, but I perish here with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants. So he now is coming up with a strategy. He realized, man, I've made a horrible mistake. I have no options left except to go home in humility to my father, and maybe my father will let me learn a trade like his hired servants have, and at least I'll be fed. When he says, I have sinned against heaven and before you, sinned against heaven was a Jewish idiom to meaning sinned against God. They avoided using the name of God. So to sin against heaven is, I have sinned against God and I've sinned against you, Father. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. He realized he had spent all the honor he had ever received from his father. He had nothing but shame, and to go back, he only could think of going back in humility and just throw himself upon his father, hoping that the father would at least hire him and he could learn a trade. And so that's his strategy. He's on the way to what we would call repentance. So verse 20. And he arose and came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. So he comes home, and the father sees him coming. They don't have a lot of trees in this area of the world, and so the father could see him pretty far away. They probably have rolling hills, and he probably recognized the son's gait, how his body moved, and he runs to him. Now, when the father runs, he's bringing shame on himself. No self-respecting, wealthy man would run. The right thing to do would be to tell one of his servants, hey, that looks my son. You run up and talk to him. You don't run if you're the wealthy landowner. You have your servant do it. But the father himself runs to meet the son. And this is, if there are no trees, everybody in the town is seeing this. I imagine there's a crowd gathering to say, what's this guy doing? Doesn't he have any self-respect? Who's going to think anything good of him if he's willing to run. And that certainly looks like his son who wanted him dead. Why is he running towards his son? And so it was a mystery to them, because if the son came back into the village would reject him. So when the father runs to the son long before he gets to the town and embraces him and kisses him, the father, even though he's lost honor by running, the father has given his honor back to his son. He's showing the village how to treat his son. So the son's dishonor is changed into honor, but it's not the son's honor anymore. It's the father's honor. And it's the honor the father has ascribed or given to his son. The son, in coming back, hasn't done anything honorable. He gets no credit for coming back in humility and confessing his wrongdoing. He has not achieved any honor. The honor he receives comes from his father, and it protects him from the actions of the villagers. And the father gives him his own honor to the son when he embraces him. Let's continue, because the father does more things. But the father said to the servants, "Bring quickly the best robe." The son probably was wearing rags. "And put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet." He was probably barefoot. He'd worn his shoes out and didn't have enough money to buy them. "And bring the fattened calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." And they began to celebrate. So the father honors a son and puts on a party. Now, this would not be a party just for the family members. This would be a party for the village. Everybody in the village would be invited. So what the father is saying, everybody, my son dishonored me, dishonored the village, but when he's coming back and I'm treating him as somebody special, I'm giving him the best robe, the best jewelry that shows my love and affection for him, and we're throwing a party with the best food, the fatted calf, the calf that was fed to be eaten at important religious festivals. And so the father has welcomed his son back, celebrates his son coming back, and the villagers now will do the same, because to oppose the father would bring dishonor on them. But so it's important to see the party is not for the son. It's for the father to express his joy at restoring his son. And so the repentance the son has isn't that he gets extra credit with the father because he acknowledged the wrong he did. He came in humility and allowed himself to be found by the love of the good father. And the good father absorbed the shame of his son and gave some of his own honor to his son. And he celebrated because he wanted a relationship with his son, and he was willing to suffer dishonor in order to honor his son. Now for Act 2, reading in verse 25. "Now his older son was in the field, and as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants." Some people say it wasn't really a servant. It was probably just some of the neighborhood boys hanging around. But that's really not important, just to be interesting. "And asked what these things meant. And he," the boy, "said to him, 'Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has received him back safe and sound.'" The reason people say it was just some of the neighborhood boys, a servant would have said, "Your brother has come and the master has killed the fatted calf." But it says your father. So the son here, the older son's probably been out working. He comes and they tell him, look, there's a party because your younger brother came back. How does the older son respond? But he, the older son, was angry and refused to go in. Now he is dishonoring his father. If his father puts on a party, the way to honor the father is to join the party. If you don't go in to the party that your father's put on, what you're telling everybody around is, I don't want anything to do with my father's celebration. I disagree with his celebration. That's dishonoring of the father. And the father came out and entreated him. For the father to leave the party and go to his son was to dishonor himself. He should have demanded that the servants bring his son in. But he went out. He went out for the older son the same way he went out for the younger son, by dishonoring himself to meet them where they were on their terms, rather than impose his rights upon them. But he answered his father, the older son, look, that's a pretty strong way to speak to your father. Look, these many years I have served you, and I never disobeyed your command. Yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him. First of all, let's look at this. The older son is angry. The father dishonors himself by coming and talking to him. But he says, look, I have done everything you asked me to do. I never disobeyed your command. Yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. Yet this son of yours, he's rejecting him as brother. This son of yours, it's not my brother, you're this son of yours, has devoured your property. The picture of somebody out of greed just eats everything up. With prostitutes. Well, we don't see that earlier. There's reckless living, but there's nothing about prostitutes. But he's certainly trying to make the younger son look worse. You killed the fattened calf for him. So what's the older brother's deal with the father? The deal with the father is, Father, I'll do everything you expect me to do, then you'll owe me. I will be obedient, but then you have to treat me a certain way. And Father, you have failed. I have done everything you wanted. I have obeyed every command, and you're not giving me anything. He's mad at his father that his deal with the father, as he understood it, the father wasn't honoring. If I do everything, if I obey all the rules, I should get some recognition. And you are obligated, and yet you never did anything. Look, you wasted this party on this son of yours. Now, here's an interesting thought. We talk about this, the prodigal son, but the older brother basically accuses the father of being a prodigal father. This son of yours, my younger brother, devoured everything you had, your property, and you're wasting, you're prodigal with what you have to honor him. So here, the good father is a prodigal father in that he's wasting resources in his joy at somebody who has come back in humility, and that he can welcome him back into the family. And here's then the father says to him, Son, you're always with me, and all that I have is yours. All that is mine is yours. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad. For this your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found. The father reminds him, it's not just my son, this is your brother. And you have everything that I have. I've not withheld anything from you. But we're celebrating because your brother was dead and now is alive. He was lost, and now he's found. What's the older brother missing? What does the older brother not understand about his father? he does not understand what motivates the Father. He does not understand the love the Father has for the prodigal son, and the Father's joy that his lost son has been found. He misses completely the heart of the Father. The Father's heart is for a relationship with his sons, and the older brother misses how important that is to the Father. But notice, we don't know what the older son does. The story is left incomplete. Why is the story incomplete? Well, because it's a lot easier to put ourselves into the story when we don't hear the end of it. We begin thinking, what would I do? Where am I? But let's first review some of the things we've learned from these parables, particularly this one. God looks for things he values that are lost and rejoices when what is lost is found. God does not want to reject us. He wants to be in relationship with us. There's nothing we can do to earn our relationship with God. All of the older brothers obeying of the Father didn't earn anything in the relationship. That's what he thought would happen. I earned some rights in this relationship because I obeyed you. What he missed is the Father had joy in the older brother and loved him, and that the obedience of the older brother was just to honor the Father. But obedience to the Father was more important to the older brother than understanding the heart of the Father. And God is actively offering all of us a relationship with him. He can absorb all our shame, all the things we have done that bring us shame, that we hide from ourselves, hide from others. And he can welcome us, lift us up to be in relationship with him if we come to him in our need and in humility. Now, as we look at this story, we can see pretty obviously when Jesus tells the story to the Pharisees, he set them up with the story of the shepherd and the woman and now of the prodigal son. They are the older brothers. They're more interested in obedience of the law than in rejoicing when people have come into a relationship with God. They miss the heart of God because they're focused on the rules, but they miss the relationship. So that's in the story. We can see how Jesus is, what he's communicating to the Pharisees. But that leaves us with the question, who are we in this story? Are we the prodigal son who's been found and welcomed home by the good Father? Have we accepted the Father's radical love and acceptance of us? Have we experienced how God can reverse our shame and give us his honor so we live a life with confidence and humility because of God's love for us? Or are we the prodigal son who's still feeding pigs and wishing he could eat the beans off these pods? Some of us might be that. Some of us might be the older brother. Do you sometimes think you can earn honor through your own efforts? Are you thinking you can be good enough to have some kind of relationship with God? Are you jealous of people who you look at and they seem to be a lot worse than you, and yet they seem to have really vibrant relationships with God? They enjoy his love, his acceptance. They enjoy the Father's prodigal love. It's given without reserve and without end. Or are some of us, because we've matured like the Father, have we experienced a relationship with God and found joy in offering the same kind of love to others? Rather than looking at sinners and being offended at them, can we see beyond the shameful things that people do to the possibility that God can remove their shame and lift them up and bring them into relationship with him? I think we could all think through, who are we in this story and what is it telling us about our own lives? And that's the part I can't do. I'll just trust God to let you know who you are in the story and what he's calling you to do. So thanks for spending time as we look through this. And I'll look forward to seeing all of you in person at some point in the near future. God bless.